Welcome back, Reg audience. It's the second of 3 live Regcasts this week. This one's a really good one. I'm not saying the other one wasn't good that we had before. Actually, there was someone who overheard him outside. He said, you know, the one I had yesterday was actually good. Well, this one's even better. So today we're talking about managing identity. But managing identity maybe in a much bigger and deeper way than a lot of people are thinking about it at the moment. And if you've come along for the ride with us today, then your thinking is starting to think about it in a bigger way. So we hope we're going to help you. Now, there's another thing that I ought to mention. Also, back online, just in time for Christmas, is the Reg Cash and Carrion shop. So if you want the register mugs, because I know that you always ask, they're now £8.99. I guess they're looking at me and thinking, is this the shopping channel? Are we in the wrong studio? Okay, so let's get on with managing identity today, because we're looking at knowing your digital customer, not necessarily looking at managing identity internally, but looking at that digital customer that you're going to be dealing with and how you manage their identity, which is probably for most of you a much bigger question. Because if you can't manage your digital customers, well, you can't do business with them in the future. More of you are going to be put in that position where you are going to have to be doing business with them based on electronic identity. Now, that's the limit of my knowledge on this, so I'm glad I've got some people in the studio to help me out with it. Who's coming to the studio today? Well, welcome a new guest to the studio from ForgeRock. Daniel, welcome.
Thank you for having me.
Now, you are from ForgeRock, and a lot of people won't know who ForgeRock are.
That's right. So ForgeRock is a really interesting company. We're about 5 years old, and we grew out of Sun Microsystems. So Sun was known for having an amazing open source identity and access management business. And when Oracle consumed them, 5 guys from Sun broke off and founded a company and really were focusing on this idea of exactly what you hit on. They saw that identity was kind of the center of everything digital, saw that the world was changing and that identity investments were shifting to external facing deployments to help engage customers, transform their experiences. Just a really, really different use case than kind of where the legacy vendors focused, which was more internal, focused on employees. And so they essentially built out a business around that, building a platform that's optimized for consumer-facing identity, customer-facing identity, handling hundreds of millions of users, using context to influence those interactions. And ForgeRock's been kind of growing since.
It's a job that everywhere people are doing their very best to avoid. So well done for taking it on for the rest of us. What do you do at ForgeRock? So
I run strategy and marketing at ForgeRock and have been there a little over 2.5 years, and also a former Sun refugee.
That's good. It's good that it takes you back in. It's good that there's a place for you all to go. Thank you. Tony Locke, welcome back to the studio.
Thank you very much, Tim. It's always good to be here.
Now, I do have to apologise at this point to Tony and also to our audience. I did happen to mention in a promo for this that Tony tends to wander the streets dressed in his underpants, muttering about this subject, and I would just like to reassure everybody that this is not the truth. I did actually make that up, and it's not accurate, because Tony always wears a tie when he does it.
Absolutely.
So, now
the treatment worked well.
Yeah. Now, Tony, this is actually though something you care about, isn't it?
It is. It's something that we've been talking about time after time in almost every area of conversation we have. That if you don't know who you're dealing with, whether it's internal, external, and you don't know the identity of the things that you're dealing with, data, elements, everything, then it's really hard to manage your infrastructure and your business effectively.
Yeah, no, so metaphorically you do wander the streets muttering about it, but in a good way.
I mutter about many things.
Yeah. I'm going to toss in, we've got an early question actually from Kurt here, who was talking about, he said in addition to what admin-focused IDM, identity management includes, I need tools to manage onboarding and tracking user identity, since we won't be relying on an HR system for that. Typical sort of problem that he's got. So he's saying, what are your suggestions for that?
It's not really about the technology, Tim. It's all about the process. And getting good processes wrapped around everything that we're talking about today is really important, and that is essential. So it's more process, less technology. You need technology to support it, but it's about process.
We're going to be pushing process rather than products today, really. Yeah.
In essence, that's the heart. Well, it's the heart of all IT. Always has been, always will be.
And so you know, I don't normally do this. One of the things we're not talking about today, Daniel, you'll not be talking to people about how to reset passwords and things like that.
That's right. It's a huge problem that people, you know, are always still trying to solve. But this is about transforming outcomes, transforming experiences, using identity to impact how people interact with technology in the world.
And that's not going to be done by people typing in. Well, as we're going to see, this is not a situation in which people can type in an email address and a password and that sort of thing.
That's right.
To make that choice. To get that straight for everybody. Now, please do send in your rest of your questions. So we gave Curtis sort of an answer to say, it's the wrong question. And but we hope you're going to get something out of what we got today. I'm pretty sure you will. Please, if you've got questions, ask the questions to us, and then I will put them to the guys and they will give you an answer. Don't wait until the end of the hour and then complain that you didn't get your question answered, because we've got the experts in the studio now for you. Okay, so let's have a look. That first thing you wanted to point out here, Daniel, is this piece of research that's just come out.
Yeah, and I don't want to present it that I'm trying to drive royalties for this book, because I have no association with the book. But there's a great data point in it. So there's this book, Leading Digital, that talks about becoming a digital master in your world. And really what we're talking about is digital transformation is kind of a hot topic these days. This is kind of concrete data showing that companies that actually are digital masters in what they do compared to their competitors actually have greater profits. 26% are 26% more profitable than their competitors. And so, you know, as you sit and look at this and hear CIOs prioritizing growth as their #1 priority, you see them asking their CIOs to help them in terms of driving growth through digital to affect that change. And this is the reason why you want to do it. And when you put it in the context of identity, you know, as you talk about cloud, IoT, security, mobility, identity is at the center of it all. It's the thing that allows you to connect users to those different devices, things, applications. And so it's central to your success in becoming a digital master.
So your argument is this is the fundamental cornerstone piece of architecture that you're going to put in if you want to do that.
It's going to separate the winners from the losers.
There's a lot of, I imagine there's probably quite a few calculations in that we don't have the ability to go into in this hour, but we will be making some business case points later on on how you put this together. Tony, let's have a look at some of your research.
Absolutely.
First off,
we know you love the charts, Tim, so we've got a few to kick us off.
I love your charts, Tony, nobody else's. Okay, so first of all, we're looking at now and in the future for interaction.
So what's going on at the moment? How important are the interactions that you have with your customers? Well, clearly today, in-person and telephone are the predominant forms that are ranked as being very important by more people than anyone else. But the web is on there, mobile devices, and even social networks are there. And this is even before we start talking about things like IoT and the Internet of Things. But what's the change that you expect in the importance of these interactions over the next 5 years? And as you can see, all of the categories are expanding much more quickly than the traditional in-person and over the telephone. So really the electronic communications are going to ramp up in importance to the business much more rapidly than any other element. The importance of talking to people isn't going to go away, absolutely not, but other things are moving on as well very, very quickly. Yeah,
so Daniel, the real story on this is on the bottom right, isn't it, when we're looking at these new ways of communicating in the future that are going to become much more important.
Totally, and I'd even take it a step further that you have things like web services that are constantly engaging with one another on your behalf. So you're going to have tons of things interacting on your behalf when you're not there. Yeah. And that's all tied back to identity.
Okay, now next one up. This is more of a schematic.
This is more of a, and then this is again basically down to, well, okay, what sort of diversity are people expecting to come across? And you know, clearly lots of different web browsers, from mobile devices or their fridge potentially, or just a screen anywhere in the building, things like that, in the car, all of this is in there. Then you've got mobile devices, clearly, the Internet of Things that we've talked about, which could be almost anything that you could.
Well, you see, here's this thing, we always talk about the Internet of Things, and people often put in slides for us, and there's the Internet of Things, and it just has, you know, sort of X billion devices and stuff like that, and it's just left hanging there that somehow this will happen.
Yeah, I mean, we're seeing it today. I mean, we're seeing it with organizations like Ziggo in Belgium, where they're authenticating set-top boxes to engage with their users. We're seeing it with companies like Toyota and the connected car, in which your car is now a platform connecting to the cloud and engaging with services. We're hearing it from other organizations that are looking at it in terms of physical devices, things like machines that now are connecting back to the cloud to engage for services. And these are all things that you engage with every day around you. And it's only there's only more that's gonna.
So you feel this is an inevitability? It's not.
It's
gone beyond the speculation that it might happen.
It completely has.
You're beginning to get your household appliances that potentially can call home via the internet for service. You're getting smart meters in your house that might be talking to the electricity company about what's the cost of power now, which things can I shut down, things like that. So there's a whole bunch of things that are going on there. It's growing slowly from a small base, absolutely. But the number of things that will be on there over time is certainly going to expand.
But to my point, there's a drip of stories about the Internet of Things as well, that it is actually far too easy at the moment to open someone's door or switch on their webcam or make their fridge do whatever fridges do.
Yeah, it raises all kinds of issues around privacy and how you actually handle digital consent, things like that.
Yeah, which is again
huge issue. It's a whole other webinar.
Yeah, that's all right. We'll have you back next time you're in the country. That's it. Now, okay, so the challenges of application access security.
And this is just taking that one element of security, and you can see all of the things that people are currently interested in that are very traditional, so mobile working.
Yeah.
But then underneath that, very high, access by customers, access by partners. All of these things, including the cloud right at the bottom, are growing in importance, and they're things that people know that they need to deal with now. And then as we move on to the next chart, you can begin to see, well, okay, looking at this more from the business point of view rather than the technology, what are the things that you've got to do? And clearly listening to customers is way out there at the top. Nearly 100% of people are saying that it's either important or critical. Interestingly, there's a few that are either unsure or it's not that important. I'm not quite sure which organisations don't care about their customers, but there's obviously a few.
they're not watching today.
Or they might have just had a really bad interaction with the customer when they answered the survey.
They pressed the wrong button.
Yeah, it's a possibility. But then going on from that, we've got continuous innovation, because the business needs to generate new services to appeal to customers, to get people working all the time, which is going to involve more and more multi-channel interaction with our customers through lots of different ways, going all the way down to making sure that when we talk to our customers, we're dealing with them coherently, so that they don't have to ask, well, okay, what did you do then, and did you know about the whole picture? All the way down to right at the bottom, finding different ways to buy. Customers may not want to just purchase things outright in the future. Subscription services are taking off in lots of different areas. But of course, underlying everything right there, protection of privacy. So again, all intimately tied into identity. You've got to know both the services that you're delivering, what data is being accessed, who your customers are, to deal with all of this. Identity is fundamental. And
an interesting first question actually from Habit here. That fundamentally about what we're talking about. When you're talking about identity of what are we talking about? You're talking about the identity of a device, an information element, a person. What?
Yes.
All, it covers the gamut.
All of the above.
I think it's tying users to devices, things, machines. It's creating that omni-channel experience that you talked about. But this is a major shift for the identity world, because traditionally it's focused on employees and users, and now you're taking the same type of technology and applying it to APIs, you're applying it to web services, you're applying it to users and things, and so it cuts across the gamut.
So every link in this process, these sort of things are going to stitch together lots of different elements. Every link in the element has to be identified.
Yeah, it's basically the thing that governs the relationships. And this is why we actually call it identity relationship management. We look at the traditional world as identity and access management. This is identity relationship management. This is about the relationship between all these different things that are connected. And in fact, it's probably one of the only things that actually touches the customer. It touches the customer more than CRM, if you think about it.
And it's also got the element of context in there as well. So how are you contacting the data? How are you contacting the customer?
Yeah.
What's the communication mechanism? What's the context of the interaction, so that you can look at some things and not others? So it is a very, very comprehensive picture that you need to put together. And if you try and do that manually, it's nearly impossible, if not impossible.
Well, you can see how complex it quickly becomes. So the answer is all of the above.
And probably some more as well.
And probably some more as well.
That we haven't thought of yet.
Okay, so
flipping from the business to the IT perspective,
Yeah.
well, okay, what are the imperatives for your business in the next 5 years? And this was a worldwide survey, so people from everywhere come up with very similar answers. And of course, there's all the mobile technology, but M2M's in there, using data for real-time business visibility. You can see 80%, nearly 75% of people saying that's really crucial, even using social media right up there. But again, security and privacy, paramount for everybody.
So, but security and privacy, from what you're saying, seems to be like a hygiene factor. Yes, you've got to be able to do it securely, but that's not...
It's both.
Yeah.
I mean, security is incredibly important to identity, right? It's the thing that can actually determine who you are and should you have access to it. It's the thing that can look at the context that we were talking about earlier, to look at all kinds of data to ensure trust and do it in a secure way. But it's for a purpose. And I think this is really a key part of this discussion is historically in terms of talking about identity, it's been talked about as an infrastructure, a technology. Kind of, you go to that corner office with the geeky identity guy in there just talking about access and SAML and federation and things like that, when in fact it should be about the value-based outcome. It should be about what you're trying to do with it, the business purpose. Yep. And so security is a key element. You know, if you think about businesses today are being told to engage in the cloud, engage in the IoT piece, engage in adopting all these technologies, but then when a breach occurs, you know, the first one to lose their job is the CEO. And so identity is that thing that allows you to reach out and do those things and build those relationships, but in a secure way.
And as we had it on the previous slide, it is that value generation, coming up with the new services, making sure your interaction makes the best of things for your customer and for your business.
Let's have a look how well people are delivering at the moment.
Exactly. So okay, given that everybody recognises these issues, how well are we actually doing? Well, you can see that the number of people saying that they're doing well across all of those elements that we just had on there are very, very small. Nowhere more than 20%. And given the nature of surveys, that number may be a bit on the high side. And you can see that for the huge majority, we're only doing sort of okay at best, and maybe really doing quite badly. So there's lots of room for improvement, and the recognition that we need to do something about all of these elements, but maybe not understanding that identity is fundamental to all of that is very, very clear.
The good bars hardly go over 50%, and certainly not for things like machine-to-machine collaboration.
That's not even good. That's partially, and partially could be very, very small. Or
we've got someone somewhere who's looking into it. Yeah.
I think this is a huge point because you know, as we said earlier, CEOs are asking their CIOs to drive growth, but the CIOs are having the hard time keeping up.
Yep.
And so I think that's why you see the evolution of things like chief digital officers coming up. It's you know, putting people in place that are really experts at handling technology to drive outcomes for the business.
Do you deal with chief digital officers now?
That's a new one that's popping up.
It's the ever-expanding C-suite,
popular,
as we have to call it, isn't it? Yeah.
The one I love is that the CMO is becoming the most important person in the business. And being a marketing person as well as a strategy person, I kind of love hearing that.
It's good, it's good that you continue to believe that, because it keeps you working late and coming in early. Now, Daniel, tell us a little bit about this. So put this into some sort of context. We've established that what we're saying is that for delivering these new services, for continuing to innovate, identity is going to be the cornerstone of it. But identity itself is a flexible concept.
Yeah, I mean, the industry as a whole has evolved significantly. You know, when you think about where it first started, you know, you think about the piece of focusing on that internal organization behind the security perimeter, all the enterprise apps, and trying to essentially secure those apps with you know, user IDs and passwords, kind of the traditional stuff that you were talking about, the password resets and things like that. But then it kind of evolved beyond that to not only be about security, but also efficiencies, lowering operational costs, lowering support costs, all that kind of stuff. And that's great. I mean, it's all still needed. You have things like governance, risk, and compliance that are important for keeping CEOs out of jail. And so that world still exists. But now identity's evolved to kind of that outbound area, focusing on the external world. And whereas most people think about identity as a security piece, I completely think about it as the thing that enables you to transform how technology engages with people in the world. It's the thing that affects outcomes. And so we see identity as being this thing that you put in place to drive your digital strategy, to help transform those outcomes in terms of how a car engages with you, how your refrigerator engages with you, how a cloud service engages with you, and so on.
It's a really important point as well, that moving from security for the sake of security to protect things to security as an enabler of new business. We've asked the Register audience on many occasions, has fear of security stopped you from doing new things? And the answer's been, yeah, pretty much. So there are things that we'd like to do that we haven't been able to do. And the other thing about this particular chart is that, while we're talking about basic security, that the number of Register readers out there that are happy that they're managing that well or in an effective, efficient manner to lower those operational costs and keep them minimized is still very, very small compared to the most. People are still running identity in silos, even inside business, never mind for the big wide world as well.
So the question's basically saying, do we have a recommendation on the Internet of Things for identity management that can scale in that way? I guess you're going to say, well, yeah, this is what you do, isn't it?
So I'll put the ForgeRock side apart.
Let's have full disclosure early on. Yeah.
Is focused on that, but it hits on a huge point, and I can tell you what we see.
Yeah.
And what we see is lots of organizations that have fragmented identity across their organization, and it's been focused on that internal world. And if you think about the use case of the legacy identity scenario, it was focused on small scale. Timeframes were 12 to 24 months. Just a completely different set of requirements. Context wasn't really a big issue. It was a lot more static. It had static things like roles that it talked about, as opposed to adapting on in real time. And those systems don't work when it comes to external scenarios. I mean, what you really need is a platform that can scale to those hundreds of millions of users, that can support thousands of transactions per second, that can be deployed in months, not years. And so it's a completely set of different requirements. And what we actually see is oftentimes what we're going up against is us versus homegrown. It's not the Oracles, the CAs, the IBMs of the world. It's us versus people
have
trying
had
to
a
do it
go,
themselves.
they've tried to do it, and then it's not going to get them there, and so they come to you.
One point worth remembering, though, is that while we may be talking about the really big organisations and scaling to the hundreds of millions of elements today, it's going to affect organisations of all sizes.
Because everyone's got customers.
But the thing I would say is, think of Instagram. Instagram was not a large organization when it got acquired, yet they were engaging with massive populations. And so when you're talking about engaging with your customers, it can be a small organization still engaging with hundreds of millions of users. You want to have that reach where you can take identity anywhere. You don't want limitations with your identity system.
But fundamentally what you're saying is this is not going to be some comfortable evolution from the work that's been done down at the bottom left of this diagram. There's going to be some element of rip it up and start again.
Yeah, and that's exactly what we're seeing is, for ForgeRock, and this is on a global basis, we're seeing that whereas companies have all that legacy stuff internally, they're standardizing on us for external completely, because it's just a different problem, a different beast.
Do you ever get kicked out of meetings for saying that?
I do.
I can imagine. I can well imagine. That's it. No, let's have a look at this in. We've talked about this in some generic detail, but so give us some examples then.
Yeah, so I want to put some examples here, and the connected car is one that people often talk about. We're doing this actually with Toyota, but you can think of companies like Tesla that are out there, and really the whole point of this is today it's not just about enterprise and cloud apps now. Anything can be a platform. If you think about what Tesla is, it's a platform with wheels that has an app store that delivers services to that platform. And that's really important. That's the thing that's going to allow them to roll out kind of the autopilot mode, or to influence whether a car should be moving forward when you're at a stoplight or not, and being able to update that real time. However, in order to do that, you need to be able to authenticate that car. You need to be able to authenticate the web service. You need to be able to securely handle that transaction in terms of the protocols that are passing back and forth. You need to be able to associate that to an identity. And if you think about it from a value-based perspective, a company like Toyota, they want to use identity to remember where the position of your mirror is, your seat, your radio station, so that the next time you are looking at a car, you buy another Toyota, because all of that can just propagate to that next car.
And again, context is everything, because it might be different drivers of the car, you and your partner, different settings for both.
Yep.
But for all of those elements that we've just gone through, it could be the context of where is the car now, what's it doing. There are some services that you can have when you're parked up and the engine's switched off. You can watch the television on the front seats, but when you're driving down the freeway, when you're driving down the motorway, when you're driving down the autobahn, or even just down the street to the shops, the screens are not going to work in the front of the car, but they might work in the back for the kids. And are the back seats occupied? All of that's context aware.
I think the other thing is, just from a technical level, and talking about what we were talking about earlier in terms of it's just a different beast, this isn't the same scenario as deploying an agent in Tomcat to protect a web app. Your identity platform needs to integrate with anything. And so you need things like REST APIs to integrate with the platform on the Toyota car. You need that to integrate with the dumb device that needs to communicate back to the identity system.
And the car business has had it's had a long history of trying to get this going, hasn't it? And creating creating sort of loose federations of different manufacturers with different ways of establishing it. It shows they're about as far down as anyone. It shows how difficult it is to get started.
Yeah, I mean, we're starting to see some really great successes with Toyota. I mean, I love following Tesla. I mean, it's completely disrupting.
I was
the
talking
market.
to someone who's got a Tesla, and he was saying he loves his car because he thinks his car understands him, because it does all of these things. It prepares itself for him in the morning.
Amazing.
It heats up its seat for him when he knows that he's coming out and everything like that.
But it's a great point, because if you think about where we are today with technology, I feel like more than ever before, we're seeing an evolution in technology and things that are now being delivered to the end user that are really transforming experiences, that are really affecting our lives in different ways, and making us think about technology in a way that we hadn't, whether it be through Tesla or Nest or other technologies.
I think the important thing is not that we're thinking about technology in different ways, but we're just assuming the technology is going to be there.
It's seamless.
So
that it's going to work, yes. But however, if you're at the back end of that and having
it work is the hard part.
Making it work is the thing.
Yeah.
So let's have a look at that. Is that you, Tony, when you were still playing football?
Not quite, no.
No, not quite, but it's something. It's quite similar. We've got some pictures of Tony off duty, and we'll be introducing those to the conversation. Not during this webcast, but during there'll be others. There'll be other opportunities for this. Now, so we're talking. It's not necessarily just about cars.
Yeah, and I think there's a couple of points I wanted to hit here. I mean, when you talk about wearables, this is taking it kind of literally. But Polo is working on launching a shirt that actually sends data back to a cloud service about you. And the part here that I think is really interesting is not so much the shirt sending data back to the cloud, but it's that companies like Polo, which you don't traditionally think of as a software company, now have to become a software company. And so if you think about the market for identity, it's just massively expanded by the fact that anything can be digital.
Well, they don't have the skills internally to do this, do they? I mean, someone was also saying to me about the Internet of Things. One of the problems with home automation is the devices are the IT people from the device companies, like a radiator or something. They're focused on internal systems. They're not focused on how to make a.
It's a great comment, because we're coming across more and more businesses where you sit in meetings talking about identity, and identity is a foreign thing to them.
Yeah.
And the reason that's important is because we, as identity providers, need to think about how to deliver these services in a more seamless, easy way for companies like that. It can't be the old kind of incestuous identity world where we're talking about these acronyms and standards that make no sense to anyone outside the identity world. It has to be things that you can deliver, that developers can consume without being an identity expert.
And also that can potentially integrate with anything, because they need to be open, because you can never be certain what the next thing you're going to have to work with will be. And it takes time always for standards and processes to catch up. So it's got to be as open as possible, but still usable.
I mean, people who make shirts are never going to invest. They're always going to underinvest in that sort of thing, because, well, that's not their job.
Well, we'll find out, right?
Yeah.
If it's the thing that separates you in terms of your competitive advantage, or driving your business at a better rate than your competitors.
Do you end up as like the identity broker then, who who basically holds the common pool of of technology that people buy as a service.
Yeah, so that's another piece. I mean, ForgeRock's play in that is providing the infrastructure for people to build those types of services. And, and you're seeing a lot of companies pop up like that are delivering identity as a service to new companies. And
but
so
you're not interested in that from ForgeRock's point of view?
We want to provide the infrastructure to build all those things, whether it be in the cloud, on-premise, hybrid, and so we'll provide the end-to-end infrastructure for building that. Yeah. But we want, you know, the next great company to build out their IDaaS solution. We want to build 40 IDaaS solutions to you know, influence all these different vendors that need identity.
Yeah.
The interesting thing as well is that those IDaaS vendors potentially going to have to be quite geographical, just because of either regulation and governance, or just because of the comfort of people and where they want those things to live anyway.
Yes. And that's, you know, that's a debate that's got a long way to go, and that one's definitely a different Regcast.
Absolutely.
But that's, What's this one?
Transportation logistics. So this is Uber, which I think most everyone now pretty much knows about. I think the thing about Uber that's really interesting is, you know, people think about them in terms of disrupting the taxi business or the cab business. So
for people who don't know Uber, you can become an Uber driver and the pricing changes according to demand.
Yes. And you basically can use your phone to find a car real time. It'll come to you in minutes. You jump in. It'll take you to where you want to go, and there's actually no cash transferred between you and the driver. It's all handled online. So very convenient in that sense. But if you think about what they're doing, they're starting to transform lots of different businesses. You know, I get these ads about you know, Uber offering to bring me a doctor to my office so that they can give me a flu shot, or to bring kittens to my office so I could look at kittens to adopt. And now you're seeing them integrate with companies like Expensify. Right, where I can actually buy my airline ticket. Some of that data is shared with Uber, so when I actually land in London at Heathrow Airport, there's an Uber waiting for me to pick me up. And so really what I think is powerful here is identity is a great way to also drive kind of the next great mashup, the mashup of data and services to actually provide better value to that user.
But to do that with consequential, did they really offer to bring you kittens?
They did.
Did you take them up on?
I did not. I'm a dog person.
Do you think we should get some kittens? But, you know, do you think we try now? We get some kittens in the studio by the time we stop broadcasting.
That's right.
Now, but to do that in a consequential way, for important services, then identity needs to be handled properly, because you need to know who's bringing the service. They need to know who they're meeting.
Right. And you need to go into things like, does that organization or that service have digital consent for me to share that data in the first place with someone else?
Yeah, and it becomes more important than whether you can just pay or not. It's not that. Okay, no. So that's it. So.
Yeah, this is basically hitting what I think was said earlier about IoT. We're just barely touching the tip of the iceberg. This world is getting bigger and bigger. It's moving at a faster pace, faster than most can keep up. And in order to kind of be ready for it, we see identity as that core in terms of being able to integrate with anything. You need to have that platform in place that allows you to react as these different services and opportunities pop up for you to integrate with them, to leverage them, to take advantage of the data.
So give us, if you have been involved, we did mention before that, you know, that a lot of you have been trying your own homebrew solutions for this, developing in-house for this sort of thing. If any of you have been a little way down that road and it's either been successful, unsuccessful, frustrating or interesting, do let us know about that, because we can put that into the conversation and we can find out how that's going, because that is going to be, I would imagine this is a lot of the conversations that you're having with people based on what they've done already.
It ends up being a pretty short conversation, and I'll tell you why. It's identity is massively complex. And we're talking about end-to-end platforms that do everything from identity management to access management to web services security to directory services. And so for an organization to take on building a platform like that, we have hundreds of engineers working on just maintaining, building, innovating on that. So if you're trying to drive your core business and drive value, and you're putting all your resources to building an identity platform, it's not necessarily the best use of your resources. So from our perspective, we drive more towards the open source world. We're a commercial open source vendor. So we kind of see that as the best of both worlds, because you get access to the source code, you can collaborate, you can contribute things back, yet when it comes down to it, you have the assurance of a vendor that's working on kind of hardening the platform, making sure you get the patches, updates, maintenances, the new features, the new standards, all that kind of stuff.
You're dipping into a common pool of technology, and you can do this. Rigor is going to be enormously important in the way that you approach this project.
And again, being able to respond quickly to new elements as and when they occur.
Yeah. So let's have a look at how you're defining identity and how you're building this from ForgeRock's point of view.
Yeah.
So first of all, this is what you came up with as the definition of identity.
This was my attempt at making it a little bit more emotional in terms of, oftentimes when people talk about identity, they talk about who has access to what. It really doesn't say much, and it assumes that there's a user involved in the engagement. And to me, when you think about identity, it's not just a security play, it's not just who has access to what, but it's this brain that actually influences how you engage with that technology. It's the thing that defines the policies of what you have access to. It's the things that defines the personalization of the data and how that can be used real time in terms of context to influence things that might happen when you're engaging with it. And so we see identity as the brain behind, what your connected applications and connected products can do. And I focus on that because it's not just about applications and cloud services and enterprise apps anymore, but it's physical devices, both digital and analog as well.
Now, and this very quickly, we've gone from very simple to really quite complicated here. People, you might want to either download our deck or go and look this one up. We've given you the Harvard Business Review.
Yeah, this one I love because this is actually an article, and it gets deep, but it's written by Michael Porter, right? And Michael Porter's the guy who created the 4 Ps. And not someone who you would think of as writing about identity. Yet when he went in and talked about the Internet of Things and how you prepare for it and what it means and looked at the architecture of what we needed to consider, you'll notice on the left-hand side that identity cuts across absolutely every layer, whether it be the applications in the cloud, whether it be the physical products at the bottom of the chart, or even the connectivity. And if you think about all these things that are now going to be communicating with these application services, there's all kinds of protocols and things that we need to think about that we never had to think about before. And so identity is that central thing that needs to respond to that. And so our view on this at ForgeRock is you can't go with a fragmented implementation or focus on a niche implementation of just federation or provisioning or password reset. You need a common set of identity services that's easy to invoke and can be done on a repeatable basis to make it as easy as possible for developers to consume it in a consistent, repeatable, scalable way.
And the idea of having a catalog of identity services tends to expand it out again because you need different elements of those services to do different functions.
You're going to have to explain that, yeah.
Well, you don't have to boil everything at once depending on what you're doing. You might just need an identity element to authorize something. You might need an identity element to relate to the connection that's going on. So they're just different services. It's almost like breaking identity management, identity relationship management down.
Identity service catalog.
You have a catalog that says, yeah, we need to do this bit, but the rest we don't need for now. We might take them tomorrow or when the service changes, but for now
you don't have it right.
You don't
so it's
need
not
to boil
a monolithic
the
identity.
Exactly.
Yeah. Identity process. You have you take what's needed.
What you need.
Modular services.
So you can use it. Yeah. So it doesn't get in the way when you're trying to do things. Yeah. I guess one of the other things as well, Tony, the middle bit of here that talk about network communication. We sit in this studio very often. We talk about software-defined networks and how they go in making the network communication more flexible and more adaptable to that sort of thing. We've got to then take things like identity with that as well to be able to make the most
because
of
again
it.
It's part of the context
of
the relationship that's going on and what's being moved, what isn't being moved, what you can do, what you can't do, when you can do it, where you can do it. All of that's important.
And this is actually a kind of a fun one in terms of innovation because we're talking with we just built a demo with ARM where we're actually tying the identity of a coffee machine, which is an analog device, to a digital identity in the cloud. And when you think about a coffee machine, you have to start thinking about how do you actually convert an analog signal to a digital signal? What's the protocol that digital communication should send back to the cloud? And so it's a completely new world. I mean, these are things that traditional identity platforms haven't thought about at all or don't cover at all. And so there's a lot of opportunity for innovation, and you're seeing new players in this world like ARM where identity is central to what they're doing.
Well, I mean, a lot of what ARM's doing is producing the designs for the little chips that go into everything. Yep. So that has to be built in somewhere along the road. So what we come up with is, again, the idea of this is that as a customer, you carry a profile around with you that will decide what things are accessible to you.
Yeah, I mean, this is an important slide, and I don't want to confuse this slide with MDM. The intention here isn't to kind of frame it in terms of how we capture and handle data in terms of a single profile in that perspective, but it's thinking about it more in terms of your identity has attributes about yourself that cut across an entire organization and that extend into other organizations and partner services and things like that. And what your identity platform needs to be able to do is actually call all those different attributes and associate them to something. And that's something that's been a huge gap, is there hasn't been an ability to tie that back to a user profile in a consistent way that can be leveraged to kind of integrate with other services. It's been much more fragmented. And so this is kind of a foundational piece to be successful and to actually start doing all those cool things that we're talking about in terms of integrating with cars or devices or things, is you have to be able to create that single customer profile. And it doesn't mean that all of your identity data needs to be stored in one common directory or data store.
It's exactly why I'm giving you the big eyes. Like, really?
Yeah. It means that you need a common way of calling all those different attributes when you need them.
Yes.
The flip side of this as well is that there are two faces to it. One's you're the identity, you're the customer. So what do you allow to happen? What control do you have over it? And to get that single profile so that you've got control of what's going on with your information. And then there's the flip side on the customer, on the service provider, whoever they might be. How can they actually get that single view, and what are you allowing them to see and do, and what can they not access and get hold of? So it works on both sides.
And this is an area where I'll pick on the legacy vendors a bit, or be a little mean to the legacy vendors. If you think about what they've provided over the years, they've built out identity platforms through an acquisition architecture. It's kind of the duct tape architecture of lots of different component products that they kind of bundle into suites, but they're not integrated. So you have different UIs, you have different APIs, you have different documentation. And if you think about that in terms of the end user, that's not delivering identity to an end user in a way that's consumable. They then have to integrate that all to create the common platform, the common services to do all this stuff.
You have to know as a user which type of identity you're being asked
and
for.
Your developers can't be asked to call data from 25 different APIs. It has to be common
quite often
and
you
repeatable.
end up with conflicting information as well, because they are in lots of different silos that haven't been designed to work together. And even the underlying data stores are different, so someone might have 14 different identities that are only varying very, very slightly, but that's enough to make them unique rather than part of a single coherent single person. Or a single identity rather than a person, again, because this goes way beyond just people.
It does make people nervous, the idea of what we're talking about here, about people feel comfortable in the fact that their identity is rather broken up and isn't a central thing they carry around with them. But what we're saying is that there is an inevitability about this if you want to interact with the world that we're making.
Well, and yet when you see that new shiny iPhone or that new Tesla that came out or that new Uber service that came out, people want to take advantage of it, right? So there has to be value.
This is what
that
you have
counterbalances
to do
that piece, but that's also very culture bound. I mean, talking to people in Germany versus Canada, are really different in terms of their take on privacy and how data should be shared, and so that's a major consideration.
I mean, at the moment we've almost got security through obscurity on identity, that things are so broken up that people find it difficult to get the big picture. Unless they've got huge resources to actually throw at something. So that's why you need control for the individual as well as for the organisations using the identity.
And the narrow point on this is you're saying even within a single organisation at the moment, then secure, then
Yes.
identity is handled in a different way according to the department that you're dealing with.
Yeah, this is when you look at different lines of business, and this doesn't have to be a business, this could be a government as well. You have different lines of business, lines of services that now need to work together. Because when we're really talking about the digital transformation, we're talking about a convergence of cloud, enterprise, IoT, mobility, security to work together. And if you think about, organizations like Samsung rolling out their Gear, iWatch, or I'm not sure exactly what they're calling it. But, if you think about all the interactions that have to happen, you now have your mobile business needing to work with your cloud business, which is needing to work with your hardware business, and they all need to be moving in a single direction. Yet, if you look across most organizations, business units and different lines of business have been very siloed. Haven't had to communicate in that way. And so this is as much a culture problem as it is a technical problem.
And it's one thing that when we have surveyed the register audience and way beyond, it comes up time after time. Actually getting the business units to work together can be even more difficult than getting the identity work.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yep.
Can I put this question? I have to read these questions quite carefully for this Regcast actually, because it's quite complicated. So the question is: as a clearinghouse of digital information, this is the questioner, identity entitlements are central to what we do. Are there federated technologies that allow many publishers to control the entitlements of their data to the many end consumers, like via self-service? How do we add the millions of pieces of data and the requisite entitlements live without flooding centralized administrative teams? So it's,
Yeah, so I mean, it's a great question, and it does raise the piece as more things get connected, it just gets more complicated.
Yeah.
There's definitely technologies. Federation is the perfect example, whether it be using things like the SAML protocol to kind of share attributes about someone in a secure way, or leveraging new standards like OpenID Connect. There's definitely technologies and ways to do that. I go back to what was said earlier, that it's not a technical problem.
Yeah.
It's a solution problem.
Think
it's
about
a business
it.
problem.
It's a process.
What are you trying to do with the data? What's the purpose of what you're trying to achieve? And does that make sense, whether it be driving revenue or more citizen value or whatnot? But the technology to do all that certainly exists.
So yes. What I want to make sure is that we get onto the time, because you do have a sort of like a checklist on how to think about this problem later on. So I want to make sure that we have enough time to cover that.
Okay.
Yeah. So yes. So when we're looking at some of these things, we've alluded to some of these things before. Is there anything you'd pick out, Daniel?
I think we covered many of these pieces. Common things that we're seeing, the customer engagement piece in the upper left is we're seeing tons of initiatives where organizations are trying to roll out new customer portals. And it sounds simple, but, for example, with companies like Geico, who we work with, prior to implementing their identity system, everything was captured as a transaction. A transaction for auto insurance, for life insurance, for home insurance. And what identity is able to do is actually pull that together so you can associate to an identity, so you can do things like upsell opportunities, cross-sell opportunities, get a better sense of who that customer is.
You could be a better insurer because you can select your customers better.
Exactly. And
because you have you don't have that knowledge problem that you don't really know who they are.
Yep. So that talks about kind of that single customer profile. But we're also seeing it on the government side. We're working with the government of Norway, where they provide a citizen ID to all their citizens, and they get access to all the government digital services. And
so Nordic in a good way, isn't it?
It is, but you think about it, we're taking 300 disparate services and allowing them to federate together so you can improve the citizen's life. And every government wants to do that, whether it be the UK with the NHS, or the US with their federal kind of cloud credential exchange that they're driving through the United States Postal Service. There's lots of opportunities there. But I think the key point for this slide is, once you actually get that single customer profile and eliminate the barriers that exist within your organization, now's the point when you can do all these cool things like influence the connected car, or influence government.
There's also other governments where they allow the citizens to do elements of the identity control. So, who can see your medical records? You have to give direct access to Dr. A or Dr. B, so that they can see the records rather than any doctor can see them, or just the set that were assigned for your region, whatever, things like that.
So you're saying
more
this
and more.
It works both ways.
Naturally
put power in the hands of a large central organisation.
I'd love to say that, but I don't believe it. I mean, it certainly does. But,
Yes.
but it can also have value on the other side.
You can build in.
It really depends on the philosophy and the sentiment of the organisation that's creating it in the first place, to a degree.
Yeah. And security contextual. We had an argument about whether security is the first or the last line of defence. We're not going to have that again.
You know, I think the most important thing here with contextual security, and you think about this in terms of the age of the hack. Every day we read about a different hack that's occurring, right? It's almost like pickpockets. It's not going to go away. But we need to have the right controls and a multi-layered security model in there to protect ourselves. And on the one hand, you have kind of the network security layer that's looking at all the network activity to try and find malicious activity. And that's great. But your identity layer needs to be a part of that too. And context isn't just about transforming experiences. It's about using context to validate users for authentication and authorization as well. And so if I can actually look at the device you're signing in from, the location, you know, the keystrokes in terms of how you're typing, there's all kinds of data I can look at to make decisions about whether I believe you are who you say you are, even if you have the correct credentials. And so we need to be using identity in a smart way to better protect our end users.
So what you say, I mean, going back to the iceberg, this is a good bit of the iceberg that in terms of validating who people are at the moment. We're very wrapped up in how to make existing processes a little bit better and more secure. But what you're saying is you can start to wrap in more and more different types of...
And it's even bigger than that in the sense of thinking of it as a security mashup. Traditionally, network vendors have not talked to identity vendors at all.
No.
So all that rich data that's being found by the next generation network security firewalls isn't necessarily being passed to the identity platform to help make and influence decisions. And so we're out now actually working with organizations like Palo Alto Networks and FireEye and looking at that. How do you actually put the two together?
I was going to say, you would be the people that would try and motivate this then. This is one of your...
We're doing it today.
This is an action for you, that's what I say.
It's a really good point in the days of, you know, these advanced threats that are coming into organisations. If your network is detecting some anomalous behaviour, you know, who's it being targeted at, so that you can actually go in and make sure that they are trained to look out for things that are maybe slightly unusual and not just treat them just as everyday business. So really getting all of that working together is very, very important.
Okay, let's have a look. We've got 10 minutes to go, so let's have a look at how people get this sort of project going, because we've given people a fairly long to-do list so far, and we've also said that you can't do it based on what you've done before, and we've also said that if you don't do it, you're going to go out of business. Basically, this is what we've said.
The to-do lists are going to get longer over the next 3 slides.
Good.
So I mean, this is really just setting the basics. I mean, you've got to know, you know, what sort of things you're looking for in the first place. So, you know, the people, the elements, the services, the data.
Everything is going to be tagged with an identity.
That's the discovery side. You need then to have operational process in how you actually handle this. And those processes probably need to be set up for different elements of the business that you're working in. But you've got to get some process to wrap this up, because identity management, even traditionally inside enterprises, has often lacked a bit of process. It's been okay at setting things up, but on the last element on the side of the chart here, the removal, that hasn't always happened. The number of times that, you know, privileged identities are left on board, or in the context of talking to your consumers, a customer might give you the ability to use information in a certain way for a certain period of time. How do you remove that access at the end of that time period? So removal is a key element of this whole operational process. And just to get back to the previous slide, reporting and auditing underneath that. You've got to have elements on all of this, but it's really about process more than technology, getting good operational process in place.
Right, so I was nagging you to come up with a business, how you come up with a business case for this, Tony, and this is what you came up with for us.
This is, again, getting back to the basics. So, you know, what are you doing? Basically, you know, so not just the apps, the users and data, but what are the business services? How are they doing it? How many identity management systems are you using at the moment?
Your guess is more than one.
And my reasonably, you know, educated guess is a lot more than one. And, you know, what's that costing you in terms of, you know, the invisible costs, the soft expenses, so people time, essentially. Never mind the maintenance and support, just keeping them working. And how much manual processing is going on there, and are they causing you any problems? You know, the business is complaining that things are not working well enough, and that therefore you're losing business or not getting income, getting revenue in as quickly as you could do.
We get, again, this links us back to, I know you said this is an extra dimension to mobile device management, but there is some analogue to that, because when we were talking about MDM, we were saying the only way to make that work is to automate it. Don't have people endlessly registering devices and attaching them to people.
The key difference between MDM and what I'd call mobile identity management is one's about locking down the device, the other is about bringing identity to a device to enable things.
Yes.
And so it's very, very different kind of mentalities.
And that enabling new things to happen is really the core of security, because that's, you don't do things because of security issues, but now you've got to do new business services, and identity has to be fundamental to enable you to do that. Which goes down to all of these things. You've got anything new happening, is your customer base, your user base expanding, and do you have any external regulatory pressures that again might cause you financial impact?
So
you can try and cost all of these. Some are soft as well as real, but the element there that's really important is getting the business value questions from your internal customers, you know, how they're going to exploit this and what they could do differently, if only.
And just because you're doing these things, well, two things, just because you're doing things, they're not going to scale, but also just because you're doing things manually in this slightly kludged together way.
Is it stopping you doing business the way your business want to do business?
It might be stopping you doing things. So your counterfactual is, what could you do if you did things differently?
You need to become an identity evangelist within your business, which means you have to understand the goals of what your business is trying to achieve and talk about the technology in a way that shows the CEO or whoever that you're going to help them get further along with identity. Which is very different than talking about it in terms of web services security or authentication or authorization, which is what the traditional conversation
is, and for good reason, because that's what it was there to do when we didn't have this bigger picture for identity.
That's right.
Times are changing.
And we have to change with it. So these are some of the things. So Daniel, I asked you to come up with, again, a checklist on.
This is the identity checklist. Now, I should say this came, I mentioned in the beginning that we believe in something called identity relationship management. This comes from a manifesto, so to speak, that we wrote with companies like Salesforce and nonprofits like the Kantara Group and companies like Experian, where we saw the identity world as being very different from what people in the identity business were talking about, and we basically wrote the pillars of identity relationship management, which ties to this, and basically means that when you're looking at your identity platform, there's certain questions you should be asking. And first and foremost, who was it built for? What was the use case? Is it for 30,000 users, or was it to reach 100 million end users? Really, really different problems, really, really different types of infrastructure that you need to solve that problem.
And with 30,000 users, you can direct what they do effectively. You can say to them, you have to do it this way. If you're looking at customers, you don't have that same control over how they interact with you.
That's right. And then the other piece is thinking about it in terms of context. So we talked about how these static models that aren't adaptive no longer work in the new world. A couple of other key ones from this. Can you actually set a common identity layer across your organization that your business can consume? So, it sounds simple, but there hasn't been in the past been a unified identity platform. And I'll sound like a marketing person for a second at ForgeRock, but I can confidently say in the world that we are the only vendor to offer an actual unified platform where you have one common repeatable way to access all your different services. Traditionally, what you've had in the world is either niche players that focus on very specific problems, or the mega identity platform, which was like CA, Oracle, IBM, which were kind of those stitched together platforms. But you've never had something that was built as one unified thing. And that's where open source in some sense is the most important piece, because it inherently means you're driving things through R&D and building things the way that people want to consume them.
That's all right, we'll let you off with that one.
I'll step off my soapbox now.
No, I think that's fair enough. No, I mean, that's fair enough, but that's an interesting, because it also gets past this idea that you build a departmental application which then has identity put into it from, and so then you get stuck in this.
You can't be myopic in your identity plans, because what's going to happen when you need to connect to that car, you need to connect to that device, or you need to manage native mobile applications.
The other really important element for me, again, getting back to the register audience, is, does it take weeks, months, years, or decades to actually get up and running? Because everybody out there has probably tangled with identity management in some context in the past, often maybe more than once. And so, how long did it take?
Yep.
Yeah.
What problems did you have? Are you still having them?
I think that's a huge point, because on the one hand you have scale as a major issue. The other piece is speed. And if you think about focusing on customer-facing identity, you're now beholden to the timeline of the business. So you can't have 18-month deployment times. You have to get people in production in 90 days. And I think it's important because I don't want people to walk away from this thinking that this is a 2-year endeavor.
No.
We're seeing scenarios where you can put in these types of platforms and get things up and running. And
it's important and it's fundamental, but it's not like it used to be rolling out ERM or something like that.
It is achievable.
You can get them up and running quickly as long as you've got that elementary basic process idea worked out. So what are the identities and how you're going to do that?
To invoke
That's
it.
the thing.
We're right near the end, so I just want to make sure that we get up on our further reading, because we have the case studies up here, and so you actually have done this with real people. Yeah,
we're seeing it across the globe, and I mentioned we're seeing it with organizations like Toyota and the connected car. We're seeing it with Salesforce and how they are actually accelerating adoption of the cloud, using identity to sync with the enterprise identity store. So literally, when you change something in that enterprise, it changes in Salesforce. We're seeing this with the government of Norway, as I mentioned before, where they're federating, over 300 services, and on tax day they have 1 million concurrent users hitting the system. So, the cool thing about this is we're going into scenarios where we're seeing kind of the legacy vendors send in 20 people over 2 weeks to do a POC, and we're sending in 2 people over 2 days. And it goes back to that models. If you have the right identity platform in place and the right structure in place, it's completely achievable to get this end-to-end platform going and to actually do these cool integrations. So I encourage people to read those. Great. Well, that's it. We're out of time, guys. Thank you very much for all of that. I think we packed quite a lot into that, didn't we? So, if you didn't, if you lost track of it along the way, I hope you didn't. But if you did, remember there is the on-demand. Remember to follow these links, and also you can pick up the slides so you can get Tony's research apart from anything else. So thank you very much for your questions. Thanks for watching, and we'll be back soon. I've been Tim Phillips from The Register. Goodbye.